I am Tim Cullen. I graduated from St. Joe's in 1981. That was a special year for me. Graduating was a special year for Calvert Schools. Talk about differentiation. You know, we all have things that we do well, and we all have things that are difficult. When I talk about differentiation, it's not just teaching the kids we had 30 years ago, or 20 years ago, or 10 years ago. It's the kids we have now. And as a Catholic school system, as educators, our job is to serve each kid that walks through our doors every day. And that's a challenge. For those of you that have more years under your belt or a few years left than those that are starting out new, you've been down that road, you've seen it, heard it, done it all before, and you've kind of paid your dues, and so there's always some new thing that comes along, and you're thinking, you know, can't I just kind of take it easy these last few years? And for some of you new folks, you've heard this or slices of this, and everyone's trying to sell you a product that will, this is all you need to know about differentiation or progress monitoring or response to intervention. So there's all kinds of things out there that people want to sell you and tell you, hey, if you do this, your kids are all going to improve their scores. But if we boil all that away, it comes down to good teaching. It comes down to planning, and it comes down to caring about each of those kids. Each of those kids, because there's nothing smoke and mirrors or magical about this process. But it's hard work, because it's easy to teach to the middle than to teach from A to Z. And differentiated instruction and assessment and planning requires you to see each kid from A to Z and teach them all. Where teaching to the middle is pretty easy. Those of you that are back here, you got to catch up to the middle. Those of you that are ahead of here, don't get bored and get distracted and get in trouble because we're bringing you back to the middle. And that's the challenge as an educator, because, you know, how do I do that? How do I find time? And some of you might already do it. You know, there's an assumption that as teachers, as kids move up through the grade levels, no one's going to love that first grader like the kindergarten teacher did. No one's going to love that fifth grader like the fourth grade teacher did. No one's going to love junior high kids because no one loves junior high kids. Okay. Or when they get to the high school, well, I hope they do okay because, you know, they're all they care about is their content area and math or social studies or science, and that's all they care about, and showing the kids how smart they are. But over the years, I can tell you that some of the best educators to talk to this stuff about are those people at the high school level or junior high level that are content specific. Even as you know, in Catholic schools, sometimes you teach more than one content area because that's what you have to do. Because you know it top, down, left, right. So it's actually easier to work within that than sometimes being that primary elementary teacher where you have to know all the content areas, but you never really get to go deep and broad enough in any one of those because a lot of it's just beginning information and knowledge, not necessarily getting to application and all the rest of it. So whatever I do today, hopefully something will stick. I call it throwing spaghetti on the wall. We got any Italians here? Any Sicilians? Tiffin, Ohio, what happened to you? What happened to you, huh? Well, my grandmother literally came over on the boat with a few trunks and her husband and her oldest daughter. And I remember watching her cook, and she would take the spaghetti and throw it on the wall. And if it stuck, that means we're good. So I will throw a lot of spaghetti at you. Whatever sticks will stick. And yes, if you get one good thing out of today, that's good. Now, I also have to tell Dominic, you know the phrase, you get what you pay for? So since he paid me nothing, guess what you're going to get? So if you get more than nothing, then I've been a success, okay? But I'm not going to hit you with a lot of stuff. I want to have conversation. Because if we don't really think about why is this important, I can give you all the research-based books. Dominic can tell you as part of your evaluation. And none of that will matter if you don't somehow connect with why is it important for me to try to reach every one of my kids. And I know there's never enough planning time for yourself, and there's never enough co-planning time for yourself with a colleague, and you only maybe have so many tutors or support teachers, but you still can do it. You still can do it, and there'll be a point here where I'll ask for some of you guys to give me examples of how you do it. Sometimes you just do it, you don't put the label on it, you don't call it differentiated instruction. You just make changes. but for it to be measurable and meaningful and to really help the kids at both ends of the continuum, because this isn't just for that kid with the invisible handicap. The kid with the learning disability looks fine. And some days he's got it, some days he doesn't, but he's got that invisible handicap. It's for that kid that's got that invisible giftedness, that doesn't really care about homework, because I can get an A on the test and it drives you crazy because I don't turn in my homework, but I get A's on the test because I already know what you're teaching me. We hate those kids. How do I plan for that kid? He should be teaching the class, and I'm supposed to plan for him. So I'll reward him, and I'll give him either extra work or I'll make him student helper. So it's for those kids too. How do you reach those kids? And then everyone else falls somewhere in the middle. So as we go along, hopefully something will connect with you. But I will, as we always do when we gather, I would like to start with the prayer. So in the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. This is a special prayer for presenters. Dear Lord, bless this handsome and beautiful group of people with their generous hearts and their open minds. Help them to get something from the presentation that they can use, if not tomorrow, soon after, to help at least one child that they serve. Thank you for their time, their dedication to Catholic schools, Catholic education, and to each other. For we know we are only as strong as we are working together. We're only a team if we believe in each other. Thank you for this opportunity to come to my beloved rival and hopefully contribute something to them that they can use to help their children, because we want all these children we want to reach their heart, mind, and soul in all that we do. And as always, we offer this up through your Son. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Because that one kid sitting in your class, you might be that one person that connects with them in a way that they haven't connected with before, and that might help them in their other classes or build some confidence. So when I say who am I grew up with special education. It impacted the career I went into. I moved out to California when I graduated from BGSU. I wanted to challenge myself. I could have gotten a job in Fremont, but I wanted to go where I was the minority. The place I went to is 80% African American, 10% Hispanic, and then Tongan, Chinese, Asian, Caucasian. So I was a minority in a place, and this was in the mid-'80s. Drive-by shootings were real, carjackings were real, the red and blue, Crips, Bloods, they were real. And so I was in this place where these kids had all this stuff around them, and then they also had special needs. So in my classroom, it was a safe place. I expected kids to learn, and they did. So if I could do that there, with what we have here, there's no reason we can't reach the majority, if not every one of our kids, guys, especially in a Catholic school. Especially in a Catholic school. Sometimes we hold on too much to our academic integrity and those grades and all the other stuff. And when I walk through some of these other pieces, I'll ask you some questions, because there's some assumptions that I would prefer to say, what are our beliefs? If you really believe that the natural bell curve is the way you should grade, then that's your belief. If you really believe getting to page 220 shows you're a good teacher, that's what you believe. But if you believe that the goal should be to help every kid master content, at least this core content, and those that get more, but that everyone should move forward, then that's where differentiation means something, and not reteaching, but teaching in a different way and measuring student progress. If you believe the goal is not to trick kids into not passing your tests, but to show you what they've learned, then differentiation is not a big deal, because it's just what you do, because that's what you expect for your own kid as a parent, and that's what you should expect as a teacher. So again, there's all kinds of extremes out there, but we really boil it down to, do I want to reach every... The problem for us is technology should never replace teaching, it should enhance it. And a good teacher can still reach kids even without one piece of technology. But the technology, if it can make things more efficient, if it can help speed up the process, if through technology you can have, instead of differentiating your lessons, you can have copies of someone else's lessons. It's not cheating. It's called sharing. So educators don't use technology enough to take that science lesson to see how you can break that down and maybe do something different in small groups than you normally do. or do a combination of the traditional hands-on experiments and have the kid dissect the frog over here through an iPad. So following the blood through the heart. So that's where, again, technology is going to open up opportunities, all right? But technology on its own without guidance and direction will just sit there until the next new technology comes along. And that's one of our dilemmas. Just when we think we kind of figure it out, we got something new we've got to learn, we've never exhausted. I don't know about you, and maybe your tech guy does, but I've never maxed out the full use of any computer I've bought. Never. It might have gotten full of memory, or I didn't know how to fix it, or whatever, but I've never maxed one out because there's always something new that comes along. So hopefully you're here because you do want to reach those kids. There's very few educators that wake up saying, I'm going to go into school today and I'm going to try not to reach all my kids today. I know I can, but I'm not going to reach all my kids today. And Susie and Johnny, it's their day not to learn. I don't care what they do. I don't care how they raise their hand. I don't care, how much their parents contribute to the boosters, or what gift card they give me for the holiday. I'm not going to teach those 2 kids a day because I do not want to reach 2 kids today, and they're the 2 kids that I chose today. Very few people wake up that way. If you're like that, please don't raise your hand. But few people wake up that way because our goal is we want to reach all the kids. We want to reach all the kids. We want to help them. Why do we need to differentiate? Because it's just the right thing to do. Now, the fare isn't equal, right? Again, I learned that from my mom. And again, raising 7 kids wasn't easy. So that's why, we had a lot of homemade pizza and a lot of that pasta because it was easy to serve that than steak and potatoes that we didn't have. But what you learn from that growing up in that is that, you just appreciate what you have. And if there's love connected to it, if there's sincerity connected to it, that's the teacher that I'll run through a wall for. I will run through a wall for a teacher that I feel cares about me. So if it's a hard content area and I've got a disconnect with the teacher, not that teachers form that, but we can't ignore that. Now I've given myself an excuse not to work hard and go through that. Differentiation doesn't necessarily make things easier for kids. If we do it right, it actually holds them more accountable. Because instead of guessing what they know, we know what they know and we know where they need to go. So there's little wiggle room. Sometimes with a shotgun blast of instruction, we create almost an excuse for kids because by the time we figure out where they're at, we've already graded that. Now we're moving on to the next content. One of our teachers at our high school, she's using her iPad. It's kind of a student response system. She's got a smart board, but she's using the iPad, and I don't even know what the app is. But the kids are sitting there in groups. They each don't have their own iPad, sitting in groups of 4. And from her iPad, she can call up on the screen the activity, and when she scrolls over, it's scrolling over on their iPads, so she can direct the lesson. She can walk them through it. They can answer the questions as it goes along. She immediately can see the responses, correct answers or not. Immediately go through the lesson. So by the end of the lesson, she doesn't have to have a bunch of paperwork to grade later, because what it will do, it'll send her an email, it'll send her a document of what she recorded with that lesson. What a nice way to save time grading things that you need later. And she can respond right now. If half of the kids didn't get it, then I need to do something else here to connect with those kids. That's where technology can come in and not just help with differentiation, but assessment to see, is the kid getting this? Are these kids getting this concept? So that's one way that can help us eliminate so much of the paperwork stuff that we do. Because so many times we get so locked into grading one way, and that's paper and pencil, and then we complain when we got that book bag full of stuff. Or do we only test with paper and pencil? Doesn't it count if someone can demonstrate something? Well, I don't know necessarily how to grade that. That's our challenge. And in every content area, it's going to be a little bit different. So there's no strategy that's going to fit neatly into each of the content areas. So that's where, that down the road, whether you get together with light content instructors or you get by grade level, It really comes down to saying, here's my lesson, help me break it apart. Because this is not something you should do on your own. It's a lonely place to be. And again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Once you differentiate lessons, and once you hold on to those, you can come back to those. It's okay. It's okay to come back to those. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So the process of teaching. This is one of the books I'll leave behind. I don't have an inventory of all these books, but I trust Dominic. I shouldn't, should I? I heard that moan. I shouldn't trust him. He's going to say he turned them back in. 4 sections, the process of teaching. All right? Decision making and planning. Now, some of you wing it. I'm not saying that you can be a first-year teacher. You can be a teacher of, I know I'm messing up your camera view there, sorry. And boy, every October, this when I start teaching this. Okay? And that's good. If in October, that's really when you should be teaching that, because you want to teach them in October what you want them to know by November. You don't want to teach them something in October that they were tested on in September. But we have kind of a cycle of how we do things, and whether you have curriculum guides or you have pacing guides or you just have, this is how I've done it all these years. Decision making and planning. So when you're planning your lessons or you're planning your activities, you know, that's the key point. How am I going to group kids or not? Is this going to be a lecture? Is this going to be Moodle? Is it going to be a video? Is it going to be a hands-on activity? Do they have to read something before they come into class? Do we demonstrate something? And then you think about, okay, my other kids. Because most of it, again, we think about those kids in the middle. What about the kids on the end? So you can have a list. I mean, your intervention specialist or support teacher can say, these are accommodations for these kids, and most of those about workload, right, with assignments, or it might be helping them with options on quizzes and tests. But a lot of those accommodations don't necessarily tell you how to do your planning. That's one of the weak areas that if you don't collaborate for those students with special needs, well, I don't know how to do that. The rest of these books will give you some pretty simple, direct ways to do that. And then you do the lesson, all right? How do you know when a kid has learned what you've taught them? What are different ways that you measure that? And math is always that interesting subject, because inevitably there will be a kid that will figure it out a different way than you taught it.
Absolutely.
And from myself to my own kids, there were times they would lose points because they didn't figure it out the way the teacher taught them, but they got it right. So sometimes, I'm not saying you, sometimes we're stubborn, and because we know some kids, if they're not able to do that, we've got to give them those set steps, or if they don't know how to figure it out on their own. But it's those kids that come around and say, well, I kind of figured it out a different way. And sometimes they can't even explain it because they just get it. So what do you do with the kid that understands it or has learned it in a different way than you taught it? You ever have those kids? They're the ones that always want to raise their hand and tell you how smart they are, right? Well, I got a different way of doing that, or wait, are you sure that's right? Have you ever had a student like that? So if you got a student that is included, because inclusion is not to mean confusion or intrusion. Sometimes inclusion without a plan becomes confusion and intrusion. The teacher feels bad. I was forced to have this kid in here. I wasn't involved. I wasn't planned ahead of time. No one really told me other than do the best you can. And that's what we used to do in public schools. We did. I spent 25 years in public schools, and I came back from California, moved back to Fremont. I got a job in Defiance, Ohio. From Fremont to Defiance is one ugly drive. It's an hour and 20 minutes, okay, with a good wind. But I wanted to supervise and work with special education. But in any public school system I worked in, they have all these resources. But even with all those resources, it doesn't guarantee that the team process is going to be in place. And that's what we do have here. And again, and I know everyone's time is precious, it's valuable, that's why we will finish early. If not, we will not be late, and we will finish early. But that's important. And you put in all this time, you do things without saying, you know, I should be paid all this extra money or that. That doesn't mean sometimes we haven't been burned or we feel overwhelmed or taken advantage of. But in most of our Catholic school systems, It is a vocation instead of an occupation. So an example like that, not even knowing the kid, my guess is you had to try to make sure some core concepts, if the kid got those core concepts or power concepts or whatever you want to call them, then we were happy with that because we agreed about that ahead of time. Anything else was bonus. Because what happens is when you have that kid, whether they're identified or not, that's a kid that will ask the question once, will ask that one question that no one else thought of because it was so concrete and right to the point, and because they're filtering out the other stuff, that's a question that someone was afraid to ask. So other kids can learn. But again, no one wants to feel intruded on, and too many times inclusion has been forcing a kid in a situation without preparing people. And I'd say it's the same again for our gifted kids too. We do a poor job of reaching those kids that already know it. When we talk about differentiation, and the point A to point B, decision making, planning to assess, turnaround time, me to us. The point A to point B, one of the hallmarks in differentiation is assessing where students are at. Differentiated assessment. So that means that if we really believe this, and this ties into response to intervention, I'll tie all those things together. But it means we know where every kid is at before we start the lesson or we start the unit. Now, you don't have to tell me, and I don't know how much pre-assessment you do, but the last test isn't necessarily a pre-assessment. So how they did in the last test doesn't necessarily tell you how they're going to do on the next amount of content. So if you use a pre-assessment, a pre-test, that's a good starting point. How many of you use your cumulative or your post-test for the unit as your pre-test? So I'll ask the question, why not? Because that's the response I usually get. Why don't we give them the post-test at the beginning and see how they do on it? Right? But if you know you have your test for what you're teaching at the end of the content or the unit or chapter or whatever, why don't we give the kids that first? Because we're letting them see the test? What would happen if we gave them that test first and they got half of it right? Would that impact how you plan your instruction? That's how you teach it. See, that's the thing. If we give them the post-test ahead of time and say, we're just trying to see where you're at, because I don't want to teach you something you already know, and I don't want to assume you know what you should know coming in here. But for most educators, it forces us to say, I've got to address all the needs of my kids, because I remember a teacher once, this kid was excellent in math. They drove him crazy because the kid never turned in his homework. It was boring. He said, I know it already. And he aced every math test that they had. And the kid was failing the class because the teacher I said, does he know everything? Yes. He's one of my top students. And why is he failing? Because he's not doing the homework I want to make him do. Now, whose issue is that? It's our issue, because we want him to go through the natural hoops that we expect. The kid wasn't trying to be disrespectful. He was saying, with all due respect, I already know this. Why don't you give me this test and then let me take the next one? The teachers are, well, what am I going to do with that kid? What am I going to do with that kid when I'm teaching all the other ones? And that's the dilemma of differentiated instruction. That's where I don't know, maybe you use technology then, or maybe the kid does get to sit in on the next year's math class, or we do some flexible grouping. And that's the trouble. Sometimes we don't want to know where kids are at because it forces us to hold that mirror up and say, I don't know if I'm teaching to everyone's point A. I don't know if I'm teaching to everyone's point A. So just for the heck of it sometime, you might want to give them that post-test. You might want to give them that post-test first and just see where they're at. Because you might find out that a kid that's getting a C or D in your class actually knows more than what they're showing you. And you might find out some other kids that are getting A's. They're not necessarily more gifted cognitively. They just might be really, 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 really good with that homework that they turn in all the time. And they might just be really, really good at cramming for that test. So remember, differentiation, it's not trying to catch kids, but it's trying to see where their point A is at. Just take a snapshot. Say you have, take one or two items from each of those sections that you think are the main items. Because that's the test I would give the kid with the learning disability, or the kid, that would grade him on that test and not the other stuff. We'd like to think that everything we teach is important. We'd like to think that everything we're asked to teach is important. But in reality, there are very few times when someone asks me to name the 50 state capitals. Really. But it was important at one time. So I think you just take a snippet there. Because here's the thing. So many times we put so much emphasis on that letter grade. And it's coming later, but I'll say it now. The $1 million bet. No one can tell me what an A means. What does an A mean? Does it mean that I learned everything you taught me? Does it mean that I worked hard all the way through? Does it mean that I will remember everything you taught me? Does an A in Tiffin mean the same as an A in Fremont as an A in Boston, Massachusetts? No one can tell me what an A really means because it's a thermometer reading. There are kids that get A's that don't study one bit. There are kids that get A's that have full-time tutors, and they study all the time. They've got all kinds of organizational charts and tools. So an A is really more of a, I don't know, litmus read on where someone's at. But we put so much pressure and so much emphasis on letter grades. The state of Ohio and the public schools, a lot of them moving away from letter grades to benchmark report cards, standards report cards. Here's my checklist of skill set. So if I have this checklist of skill set, I get a good grade in the class, but it's measurable. If I say I can do 13 out of 15 addition problems with two-step regrouping independently, you can measure that. But if someone says, I got an A in math, I don't know what that means. So I throw that out there because a lot of times we think that our only tool or our best tool to measure kids' progress are letter grades, and I would disagree. How many of you got an A? The Spirit was moving you, brother? That's okay. How many of you got an A in a class that you really didn't have to work hard in? How many of you got a C in a class you busted your tail to work hard in, right? How many took a college class thing? I wish the professor would give me one of those contract options because I really don't care about getting an A in this class. Right? I really only want this class to renew my license or certificate. Or, you know, they just assume that everything they're saying is so important. We've all been insulted by teachers. None of us have ever done the same to our students. No one in this room, I'm sure. So we got to put ourselves in that desk and say, have I ever kind of felt it? I'm sitting in this class thinking, is all this important? Is it all about the book? Or this test had nothing on it that we talked about in class? So we need to be cognizant of that ourselves because sometimes we fall into that. Now we're on a block schedule. What do you guys... So with our block schedule, you know, we think about it, and I'm challenging our teachers. We're not changing back, but there's that thing, I don't know, should we still go on with this thing? Because think about those learners that it's fine every other day you have your class, but when you have delays or snow days or sick days or other thing, theoretically a kid could miss several days of instruction in your math class. If I'm not an independent learner, I need that every day a little bit at a time, and I'm not using my support period or study hall, how much is the block schedule impacting those kids? So we try to fill in those gaps with a support period for those kids and fill in those every other days with some supplemental academic support. But some people are like that, you know. Some people learn best from listening, taking notes, or a little bit every day is good for me. But if we reviewed 2 days ago and now I've got the test, did that review really do much for me? Maybe not. So even how we structure our classes, our schedules sometimes can impact kids. So point A to point B, do we really know every kid's point A? So if you're not sure, give them a post-test. If you're not sure, give them a just because. And tell them there's no grade to it. I just want to know what you know. I just want to know what you know. And you'll have a kid say, well, if I pass it, does that mean I don't have to come to class? And you have to have an answer for that because they do have to come to class. Yeah. That's a kid you sit down with the kid. I'd say you sit down with the parent and a colleague. Doesn't have to be a principal, could be another teacher, and say, let's kind of figure this out, guys. Because what you don't want to do is hold the kid back. Right. What you don't want to do is give the kid more work necessarily unless it's engaging and entertaining. What we do a lot of times in the younger grades is they get to be the reader in kindergarten, right? We let them help other kids, so we basically put them to work without paying them. So I think sometimes we don't ask the kid. What I found effective is to say, what have you thought? You could have a learning center. You can do that in middle school and high school. You could have a learning center so it's more enrichment, something I like to do. But sometimes if you give a kid a list of, these are things I'd like to do when I'm done with my work, and leave some blank lines and say, here's some thoughts I have. Take this home and think about it. I guarantee you the kid will come up with 2 or 3 things. And that's okay. It's okay because they'll be engaged and they're probably going to be more of an independent learner. So see what the kid says, but sometimes you talk to the parent and kick around some ideas because that's that difficult part. It's scary. It's scary. To me, it's as scary as how am I not reaching that kid that comes every day. The kid you can't reach and you try everything is that kid that comes every day. They're like, it's scary. It's humbling. But on the other end, to me, the scarier part was that kid that already knows what I'm about to teach them. So again, it's that same process of what can we do? What can we work out? Because a lot of times what we assume is good for them isn't. It just, and there's some kids that will dumb themselves down because they don't want to stand out that way. Yeah, you can team kids up. And again, whether you do a traditional lecture, and if we were more of a half-day thing, guys, I'd have you doing different activities and that, so I apologize because I like to get people moving. But you can do groupings. You can do, you can have someone be a leader in an activity. Sometimes those kids, maybe before you do your next lesson, you have them share about a book that they read. Take them to that next level of expressing their thoughts or giving their editor's view about, now this book that you guys are going to read that I already know. I mean, if the kids don't hate the kid, but make them a guest editor, or have them they can share something from a book that they liked, so that you can have them do public speaking, you can have them do some teaming, but it's got to be natural and it's got to make sense, and the kid has to buy into it. But a lot of times we don't talk to the kid and ask them, what do you think? And so we waste time trying to come up with something that works for 9 kids. But again, get them involved, get them engaged. And again, it's the kids that, and then on the other end again is what do you do with that kid that always raises their hand but they are never right? How do you handle that? How do you handle that kid that they're enthusiastic, they have not hit that wall, they have not run into that wall of, this is the millionth time I've raised my hand, but I think I know it this time. And the whole class, they're almost like, oh, Johnny, don't do it, Johnny. Oh, Johnny. And no one's got their hand up, and how do you handle that situation? Yeah, you always want to say, you know what, that is a great answer, Johnny. Yep. But Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde were really a fictional character. They weren't connected with this, but, you must be doing a lot of reading, because you know those names. What I would do, it's called front loading. So for those kids that are having trouble with vocabulary, for those kids that have trouble with concepts in your class, if you can't front load it for them, again, whether there's a tutor or someone else that can help them out, what I would do with those kids, I would give them the answer ahead of time. I would say, tomorrow in class, when I get to this section, and I would give them a cheat sheet, and I say, you put it wherever you want. And I said, I'm going to look around class, and when I ask this question, I'm going to turn to you, and you're going to have the answer. Now, I would say, don't tell anyone, and let's see how the rest of the class reacts to it. I would cheat ahead of time with that kid, and they would raise their hand, and this would be a question that no way this kid's going to know it. I said, now when you answer, you got to answer it matter of fact, not like and they'd raise their hand, and the kid's like, yeah, and they'd answer it right. I said, thanks a lot, and I'd move on. Now, I did a couple of things. It gave that kid kind of that, how did he get that right? It kept the other kids a little bit unsettled. But it was my way to say, you know what, everyone, I love the kid's enthusiasm because I had that kid. He didn't even wait till the question was asked. He just wanted to participate. So you work around that. But sometimes we don't front load because those kids, you know, they're good. Boy, I didn't get it today, but I got it. I'll get it tomorrow because they need that little bit of extra. So if you have a kid in your class, you don't have to have a special education degree to front load something on the kid. You can say, you know what, we're going to be doing this next week. Here's some key vocabulary, whether in any of your content areas. Here's some key concepts I want you to take home. Maybe look it over the weekend with your mom or dad or whatever, but I want you to be the first one to see this. But we're going to be talking about it next week. Because what happens so many times, we try to fix a learning need, and we spend so much time fixing learning need, now the kid's not getting that content. And then the gap widens. Because we either remove them from the content, because all our services are pull-out, or we're trying to fix that skill. We're fixing that skill and all this new content's coming and they never catch up. The perfect example is the parent or teacher that feels that the kid has to be able to tie their shoes. That's a big deal, I guess, in kindergarten. I don't remember back then. But it was like, you know, if you couldn't tie your shoes, you couldn't move on in life. And did you guys have trouble tying your shoes when you were a kid? It's okay.
6th grade.
Okay. Thank you. We're here for you. So it was a big deal, right? Tie your shoes, and whether you do the bunny ears, you do the other technique, everyone had their own strategy how to tie shoes. And so I would see these kids, and a lot of kids with multiple disabilities, and the parents, I'll be happy the day Susie can tie her shoes. And I would say, at some point, tying shoes isn't going to be important. You got Velcro shoes, you got slip-on shoes, you got other shoes. Let's start talking about recognizing money. Right? Because Susie's going to need that when she gets older. Or they've got to know their facts. They've got to know their facts. They've got to know their facts. At some point, you move to using the calculator correctly. Now, there's some of us, and I'm old school this way too. Wow, these kids, they don't have those fundamentals. What's going to happen when that machine breaks down and they can't? It's not going to tell them how much that burger and fries costs. I don't know. Every time the power goes out of place, they usually shut down, so it doesn't matter. But don't we use some of these newfangled, do we still use the abacus? I use the abacus because it was the greatest tool. Why should I use this thing called a calculator? Right? Don't we use some of these newfangled inventions and contraptions because it makes life easier? Well, but I know the foundation. I know the fundamentals of it. I understand that. But there's difference between accessing, we want the kid to understand the content. And so many times we get so locked into, but they've got to do all those other steps. You could have a kid that can't add to save their life, but they can solve that story problem because it makes sense to them. All right? And they can tell, oh no, you've got to take this and this together, but they don't know how to calculate it. So there's different strengths that we have. Everyone here, if I ask you to close your eyes, and I won't, because you will fall asleep, everyone's got a favorite subject or two, right? Raise your hand if your favorite subject has and always will be and continues to be math. Sorry, math teachers, but it is not, that's usually where it ranks, okay? Raise your hand if your favorite subject was, always has been, and will continue to be reading. Raise your hand if it's writing. Science. Social studies. Eternal rest in heaven because of your religion love. There you go. How about art? Physical education. Okay, so not everyone raises their hand for the same things. Did I miss something? Did I miss something that... I liked home ec, but they don't call it that anymore.
I loved home.
Okay. Lunch and recess, those peripheral content areas. So again, most of us teach what we'd like to learn. Most of us teach the way we learned best. And these kids come in saying, you know what? That one kid will say, that's not working for me. How do I get there? Planning to assess turnaround time. If we're going to test kids, we need to test them and quickly turn that around. So how many times do we give kids quizzes and tests and we don't necessarily have a quick turnaround time to give them that information back? right? I mean, be honest. So why are we testing them? Why are we testing them? To have something to put in, use progress book, grade book, power school? Okay.
To assess what they know.
Right.
Not to see what they know and what they don't know. Go from there.
So, and it's harder if you have essays, higher level application type things, projects. So why do we assess them? Because we want to see what they know. Do we spend a lot of time? Now, some of the daily things are perfect. But do we frequently then review that assessment with the class? Do we kind of look at the main things that most people got wrong? Do you ever sit down individually with kids, have kids do some seat work, and then say, hey, let's talk about this test and do we do that? How many of you have been in that classroom, either high school, college, and you wanted to be able to have a conversation with the professor and say, I'm not understanding why I got this grade. Can you help me out? And you didn't get that opportunity. So when I say turnaround time, our assessments shouldn't be so cumbersome that we got a long turnaround time to get the information back to the kids. Because the longer they have to wait, the less meaning that assessment had. Unless you're crystal clear what their new point A is. Because here's point A, the test is supposed to measure point B. If you're waiting 2 weeks, 10 days to get that graded, but now you're teaching new content, that test means nothing. You're just assuming that they're at this point now. So now we repeat that cycle of guesstimating where the kids are at instead of using that teaching cycle of test, evaluate, plan, teach. So I hated paperwork. So I tried to have as much observational assessment as possible. I use index cards a lot, and I keep track. If a kid gave me verbal answers, you know, is a kid allowed to give a verbal test? Do they all have to do the paper pencil? Is it fair to let a kid take a test orally when everyone else took it paper and pencil? How many of you guys disagree that you shouldn't do that? Well, I use the example because you see this a lot at the primary grades is that, well, it's not fair if I change the test for this kid because what are the other kids going to say? Or if I change it for one, I have to change it for all of them. And I always say, well, if you take your smartest kid in your class, who happens to be right-handed, and they break their arm, their right arm, do you have to have an IEP, and a MAP, an ISP, an act of Congress? Do you need approval from the Pope to let that kid take that test orally? We wouldn't think twice about it. Well, it's not fair. Why should he give? Well, because his right arm's broken. That's what he uses to write with. Why are you letting him take? Because I know he knows it. Oh, he's my smartest kid. Oh. So we'll do that because we know the kid knows it. But sometimes we want to accommodate because we're not sure if the kid knows it. Maybe they got that invisible handicap, that processing issue, that learning disability, that attention deficit. So whenever someone digs their heels in and say you shouldn't adapt or modify tests, then I'm saying then you're putting all your eggs in the basket saying, one, your test is the best test there is. Two, that you've never modified or would never modify for anyone. Three, that even if your kid know the kid knew it in class, say the kid's dad dies and they got to take the test the next day. Well, he's got to take it the next day. That's in my syllabus. We're not going to adapt or differentiate. So some things that we do that are obviously right, I just encourage you to sometimes give in a little bit where it may not seem so obviously right, but it's something you should do because the kid may be able to show you more of what they learned through a differentiation of a test. The easiest way to do that with kids with direction issues or attention issues is to highlight the test, the sections that you want them to do first. You can give them the same test as you gave everyone else, but just highlight the key words and the directions. Oh boy, Johnny, you would have got an A, but you did all the odds, and I said do all the evens. Well, he blew right past that because he didn't pick that direction up, that key word. Sometimes you highlight those core parts of your tests. Have the kid do those first, and then grade only on those. I can't. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can do that. So it's not always reducing things. Sometimes it's targeting. So it could be the same test. It's just modifying it ahead of time. A lot of times if you have a tutor or a special ed teacher, well, let's see how the kid does. Have him take the test. And then when he fails them, they can retake it with the tutor. Instead of saying, take what you can, do what you know, and then finish the rest with a tutor. Inevitably, and I don't care who you are, people say, he does a lot better when he takes the test with a tutor. I think she's helping him too much. I think she's giving him the answers. And it may just be that smaller setting, no distractions, no time crunch. So you got to work through those things. There's no one right way to do it, but you've got to feel comfortable that what you're doing. So just for that smartest kid in your class with a broken right arm, you wouldn't blink twice about doing accommodation or differentiation for an assessment. Somewhere in between there is that kid, that rambunctious kid that you just can't get a read on because they've got that invisible handicap. They've made it through because maybe their parents paid for Sylvan for 12 years, or they paid that tutor. Maybe you were that tutor. A lot of parents with kids in Catholic schools pay a lot of money to give their kids support services. Is that wrong? No. But sometimes the delay is finding out that that kid has a processing issue that maybe should have been identified before. And it really hits the wall when they get to middle school and high school, when you get to more in-depth, more application, more writing, more content. So think about those things. Think about that invisible handicap. Me to us. I mean, this is not a one-person show. You don't have to do this on your own. You don't have to do this on your own. Talk to a colleague. Say, hey, you seem to really connect with Lee. I'm not sure what's going on. We both have him. What are you doing with him in class that seems to be working? You know, and share those ideas. One strategy that works in one content area may carry over into another one. It could be class seating. It could be giving them your teacher's notes. There's a lot of, I had the worst grades I ever got in school was handwriting. I was left-handed, and the nuns were guaranteed that it was a sign of the devil. Okay. And I had my knuckles rapped many times. And I was not going to learn how to do right-handed cursive, and I was going to do left-handed. And that's the only time my mom ever came to school. And she came to school, and I remember the day, Sister Ignatius, everyone had a Sister Ignatius. She was strong. She was strong. So she would wrap your knuckles, and she was really good at that. So I said, Mom, she keeps wrapping my knuckles for writing left-handed. She goes, okay. She came to school one day, and I saw my mom. And my mom, Sister Ignatius, walked in the room, and then Sister Ignatius is facing the class. And my mom's only about this tall. She's talking to her, didn't hear a word that she said. Sister Ignatius' color in her face changed 3 shades. It ended up gray. And she went like this, and my mom walked out. My mom never told me what she said. But Sister Ignatius never wrapped my knuckles again. No, I got a C and D in handwriting that year. But my mom, I never asked her. I didn't want to know, because she should not have been threatening the well-being of a nun. But my mom was trying to teach Sister that you should differentiate from my son because he's a good student. And he's not being rude, but he's left-handed, so let him. She never taught me. I never learned this side. So to this day, every time someone says, your handwriting is horrible, you know, you better, they won't cash your check. Yeah, they cash my checks. Your handwriting, that's going to hold you back, you know. No, I learned how to hunt and peck and do keyboarding. That's why I like technology. So that was and to this day I'm hypersensitive about that because I've got poor penmanship. I will print in capital letter blocks to the day I die. Is that my excuse? Yeah, but was it handled right? No. So I hated something that I should have learned how to do better. So you don't want to be that teacher that forces a kid into the cookie cutter way where they hate the content or they hate you because they need it in a different way. Now, if there's a 4-foot something Sicilian woman that comes in your classroom, do not let her in. Do not let her in, because she'll probably say something she shouldn't. What do you believe about teaching and learning? Here's some beliefs. Here's some beliefs. Again, I'll leave all these books. Students differ in their learning preferences and need multiple and varied avenues to learn. Pretty much everyone agrees with that? It doesn't say you know exactly how to do it, but we know. We're all different learners here. Assumption 2, or belief, all students can learn what is important for them to learn. Sometimes we got to tell them. Now they'll say, is this on the test? And if it is, say yes. It is on the test. It's all on the test, right? Yeah. Teachers make the difference. Is that a belief you have? You're scaring me, guys. Teachers make a difference? Okay, oh, wow. Wow. You do. You do make a difference. Instruction must be meaningful. Is that a belief you have?
Yes.
Okay. Curriculum assessment and instruction are inseparable. That means they should be connected. Curriculum isn't just textbooks. It could be stories. It could be hands-on activities. It could be the book. It could be the workbook. It could be technology. It could be a guest speaker. Assessment isn't all paper and pencil. Diversity should be valued and respected. Now, we have not received our Chinese students yet. Okay? It's like we're waiting. We're waiting. I believe St. Wendelin has received half of China. I understand. St. Wendelin has received the majority of China. And so I'm getting my students and my parents ready, and they're saying, when are they coming? But we're excited about it. We're looking forward to it. So they haven't come yet. So we think maybe by the end of first quarter we might get one student. Now they're saying second semester we should be getting some of the students. But everyone's excited about it. Now we're all ignorant, pretty ignorant, and so we use humor, right? So we use humor, we make jokes. But I'm excited about it because it will stretch us to find a way to reach those kids. We have had exchange students before. We had a student that was an exchange student, came back last year as an international student. So we got to see, by the kid coming back, her English improved, her relationships grew. So if I hadn't seen that, I would have been less sold on having students come. But if they come back, I think you will see, and we'll see that same kind of growth because there's that comfort level and just being immersed in the culture. But they haven't come yet. That's a whole different differentiation subject, and again, I wish you guys well with that. I wish you well with that. Access. We want kids to have access. We want them to be engaged. The whole technology thing, they should be engaged. If you're with the arts, whether it's performing arts, visual arts, from music to choir, the kids are engaged. All right, the kids that do that, that's why there's some of the most passionate kids and their parents are the most passionate boosters, because the kids are engaged. They're producing something tangible, something that is rewarding. All right, so you want them to be engaged. Ownership. When you talk about response to intervention and you talk about progress monitoring and all the rest of that stuff, and when I talk about that turnaround time with grades, the more access we give kids to their own progress, the studies have shown, you're going to see increased learning. So when that third grader has a spelling chart on the wall, and they can put a star, and they can count how many stars they got because they had 80% or higher, we shouldn't just give it to the kids that got perfect scores. And I can see, well, I only had 3 stars this quarter, the next quarter I had 7. That kid is showing growth. Maybe it's not the same as yours or yours, but I'm growing and I'm learning. Kids can chart their growth. They can chart their learning. Does that stop in middle school or high school? It shouldn't. So many times we get on the letter grades, but we say, hey, you went from 10 out of 20 points to 18 out of 20 points. That's growth. That's growth. So get the kids involved.